8. Guyola Island, Naples. Most people travel to Italy for its beautiful landscapes, delicious food, and historic culture. But if you're fascinated by all things spooky, you might want to book a trip to nearby Guyola, where legends of an ancient curse haunt the tiny island. The story started after a man known as Il Maggio, or the Wizard, who was living a lonely, troubled life as a hermit on the island, disappeared in the early 1880s. Some say he cursed the land before he vanished. But his mysterious disappearance was only the beginning. Many unfortunate things came to pass for anyone who subsequently lived or owned the island. Each and every one of them met with strange fates. On one of the islets around Guyola, there's a small villa perched overlooking the Gulf of Naples. Over the years, various people have lived in the villa, including British author Norman Douglas. Douglas died just 2 months after permanently moving into the villa. Other inhabitants included a man named Gianni Agnelli, the owner of a Fiat, whose son died of suicide and whose nephew died of a rare disease after he spent time on the island. Then, multi-millionaire Paul Getty bought the island, and his grandson was kidnapped. The island's last owner was Gian Pasquale Grappone. He owned an insurance company and ended up in prison because of his debt. And as recently as 2009, 2 more people were found murdered just opposite the shore of the islands. Some wonder if the island's past could have something to do with the bad luck the people suffered there. In ancient times, the Romans built a temple to the goddess Venus on Guyola. But as water levels rose, the ancient ruins and the harbor that once stood there fell into the sea and now lay at the bottom of the Gulf. Could that be the source of Guyola's curse? No one knows for sure. Today, the villa sits uninhabited and abandoned, but if you happen to visit the island, you might just hear whispers of the past and its haunting history. 7. Surtsey Island. In 1963, an undersea eruption 20 miles, 32 kilometers off the coast of Iceland, resulted in a new island emerging from the depths of the North Atlantic Sea. A dangerous buildup of hot magma and underwater fissures between tectonic plates explodes violently when it interacts with the colder ocean water, spewing clouds of steam and ash 5.6 miles, 9 kilometers into the air. Over the course of a year, the eruptions continued, building up and hardening. When the eruptions finally stopped, Surtsey Island sat at about 1 square mile, 2.6 square kilometers, and at its highest point stretched 558 feet, 170 meters above sea level. Even though the island eventually stabilized, its location made it a victim of erosion. By 2017, it had shrunk by 50%, with a lot of the volcanic material becoming loose and compacting together. The underlying structure of the island also started to sag under its incredible weight. But somehow, life has found a way to thrive there, and to preserve it, the Icelandic government declared Surtsey Island a natural reserve in 1965. Multiple species of plants and insects have since taken over the island. Seabirds have found it to be the perfect resting place, with gulls and fulmars taking on the important role of dispersing seeds and growing the natural flora there. Grey harbor seals and orcas also made their home there, making the area one of the richest places on the earth to spot unique species. What started as a volcanic eruption in the early 1960s soon burst to life, making the young island a vibrant place in the North Atlantic Sea, one that started in violence only to result in something breathtaking. UNESCO declared Surtsey a World Heritage Site in 2008. 6. The Bikini Atoll. The Marshall Islands in the western Pacific Oceans are an idyllic place with sandy beaches, palm trees, and crystal blue waters as far as the eye can see. The islands became infamous during World War II, when the atolls of Bikini and Eniwetok were occupied by Japanese forces. After bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the US chose the islands as a place to test the effects of a nuclear explosion. All the islanders were evacuated in July 1946, and Test Able was detonated over a fleet of captured ships to test its effectiveness. 78 vessels were subjected to the test, with 5 sinking and 14 others destroyed. Animals were even placed on the ships to see how the bomb would affect them. A third of those on the ships died from the blast. Shockingly, sailors were later ordered to scrub the fallout from the decks, exposing them to high doses of radioactivity. Because decontamination was unsuccessful, many of the ships were scuttled in the Pacific. Between 1946 and 1958, both the Bikini and Eniwetok atolls suffered 67 nuclear explosions, which yielded about 214 megatons of explosives. The most devastating one was a hydrogen bomb tested in 1954 nicknamed Castle Bravo, one with the largest nuclear yield ever achieved by the US that was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that exploded over Hiroshima. These nuclear tests had a devastating effect on the health of locals and the environment itself. Many of the islanders and Japanese crew fell ill from radiation, and long-term studies done on inhabitants of the contaminated islands found increased levels of thyroid cancer. It would take until 1992 for the US to stop conducting nuclear tests, but by then the damage was already done. After more than 1,000 tests, 40% of the affected people died. As recently as the year 2000, the president of the Marshall Islands sent a petition to the US Congress, hoping they would continue their decontamination projects and help with getting health aid for those who were affected. But the petition was ignored. With the islands contaminated and food grown in the soil unsafe, many of the residents were left alone starving due to the lack of food. Any fish that were caught were poisonous because they ate what was on the reef. Still, some people still visit Bikini Atoll, but they have to obtain prior approval and travel with a diver and 2 local government council representatives to verify they don't remove artifacts from the wrecks in the lagoon. Even with its beautiful beaches and perfect dive sites, the history of the nuclear tests done there would be enough to change anyone's mind who might want to visit the site. 5. Diego Garcia. In the middle of the Indian Ocean, a secret military base is at the center of a tug-of-war. The archipelago called Diego Garcia is the site of a major US military base that was released from Britain in 1966. The 17-square-mile, 44-square-kilometer island has been used as a launch pad for Air Force missions in the Middle East. But its reputation hasn't always been so distinguished. Islanders who originally lived on Diego Garcia were evicted from their homes to make way for the base. And even though the land was leased from Britain, the UN's top court ruled that the British illegally gained possession of the island in 1965. The ring-shaped chain of coral islands is surrounded by 60 other atolls. With its natural deep harbor along the coast, it's the perfect site for a naval base, which is probably why the US is so intent on keeping ownership of it. With an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 service personnel stationed on the base, it's an active site of military action, one that's off-limits to the general public. The downtown area has also been built up to resemble a small American town, with a bowling alley, various shops, and areas to go cycling. Its use during attacks against Afghanistan after 9/11, as well as military operations during the war on Iraq and the First Gulf War, makes an important piece of the American military arsenal. But because of the dispute between the US and Britain, the future of the base is in doubt. The British Empire wants Diego Garcia back, putting the archipelago with its strategic position between the Middle East and South Asia in jeopardy. Its ability to also accommodate aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, and other ships could be the very reason why the US doesn't want to give up ownership of the atoll. But the Americans aren't the only ones who are facing backlash over the ownership of the island. The original residents of the atoll were people known as the Iloi, whose ancestors were transported to the islands as slaves to work the coconut plantations in the 18th century. After they were uprooted from the island to make way for the base, many of their descendants moved to nearby Mauritius and the Seychelles, but life wasn't idyllic for them there either. They faced poverty and discrimination, and those who moved to Britain continued to experience hardship. In 2006, the British High Court ruled that their expulsion was illegal, but still, the British government denies they broke any laws in expelling the Iloi. Even though the UN has served an eviction notice to the British, the future of the base remains in doubt, with the original islanders hoping that one day they will be able to return to their homeland. 4. Farallon Islands. Hidden in the dense clouds 28 miles 45 kilometers off the coast of San Francisco, the jagged group of rocks known as the Farallon Islands linger in the mist like a sleeping giant. The natural beauty of the islands make them a popular destination for tour boats, but the waters surrounding the rocky shores are deadly. The islands got their name from a friar named Antonio de la Ascensión, who sailed past the area with the Spanish expedition in 1603. Farallon means rocky, but the formations earned an even scarier nickname. Local mariners call them the Islands of the Dead because they look like ragged devil's teeth. Their prominent location in the Gulf of the Farallones is home to the second lighthouse ever built in the USA, one that was put there to prevent ships from crashing into the rocky shoreline. Because of its location in the Gulf, it's become a haven for seabirds, which makes for a very noisy nesting season when the birds screech at all hours of the day and night. The sound carries so far that local residents have to resort to earplugs from May through July to get any sleep. Researchers have recorded more than 400 species there. Back in the 1860s, locals even got into a strange contest called the Egg Wars. Rival companies wanted to take down the Farallon Egg Company, and they descended on the island to raid it of its eggs. Things got serious, with 2 men dying and 4 wounded, which led the federal government to stop collecting eggs from the island a few years later. With less foot traffic, it's allowed other species to thrive there. 5 different species of northern elephant seals that were nearly hunted to extinction now have recolonized the island. Northern fur seals have also started to take refuge there, which has started to attract sharks that circle the island looking for their next meal. With so many species making these islands their home, local biologists are worried that visitors will threaten these vulnerable groups. That means that boats and tours are prohibited, but there is a live webcam of the islands for those who want a sneak peek at the animal life that's taken over. Would you like to check out the live webcam feed of the Farallon Islands? Tell us if you do in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. 3. Snake Island. A small island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean has so many venomous snakes that all human visitors have been banned from going there. Even though the island is only about 5,000 feet, 1,524 meters long, and 1,600 feet, 487 meters wide, the idyllic island and its lush forests are teeming with over 2,000 golden lancehead pit vipers. You might think that the first thing authorities would do is to get rid of so many deadly snakes, but this particular species is so rare that the small island is the only place in the world where you can find them. They also just happen to be the most venomous snake in Latin America, with almost 90% of all snake bites in Brazil blamed on the species. Lancehead vipers are so deadly that their bite can kill a person in under an hour unless they can get a dose of antivenom. With the island being so remote, 90 miles, 145 kilometers away from the nearest shoreline, anyone bitten by the lancehead would never reach the hospital in time. Even though the snakes are so dangerous, someone still has to study them to make the antivenom needed to treat their bites. Students from the Sao Paulo State University have been visiting the island since 2014 to study the second highest density of snakes in the world. Legal authorization is needed to go there, with only researchers or the local Navy being able to take qualified personnel. It was cut off from the mainland around 11,000 years ago, when the sea level rose after the continental ice caps melted. The species that survived on the island adapted, becoming more venomous than their relatives on the mainland. And with no land mammals on the island, that means the snakes can thrive and reproduce without the threat of predators, meaning they pretty much have the run of the place. If curiosity strikes and you think you might want to sneak onto Snake Island to catch a glimpse of these rare creatures, you might want to listen to local legends about the small settlement that lived there from 1909 until the 1920s. As the story goes, a huge fleet of snakes slithered into their homes, killing everyone. Not exactly the place you want to take your next vacation. 2. Tristan da Cunha. Just off the coast of South Africa, a mysterious archipelago sits abandoned in the South Atlantic Ocean. The main island, as well as several smaller islands that make up Tristan da Cunha, are so isolated, they're considered the most remote inhabited archipelago on Earth. The territory, whose main island measures about 37.8 square miles, 98 square kilometers, formed when the Earth's mantle swelled and burst above the water's surface. The first explorers who came across the island mostly ignored it, believing its rugged landscape, rainy weather, and windy conditions would be too harsh to survive. Many ships sailing around Africa to the east visited the archipelago, with Dutch vessels landing there in 1643 to replenish their supplies of fish, seals, and penguins. They later launched 2 expeditions to see the island in the mid-1660s to see if it would be a good place for a permanent supply base, but they abandoned the idea when they realized there was no safe place to build a harbor on the mountainous terrain. In the early 1800s, an American crew wanted to try their luck at building a trading station there. But something happened to the 3 men on the expedition, with only one surviving the journey. The other 2 were said to have drowned in a fishing accident, the first of many unfortunate events to take place there. In 1816, the British military took possession of the island, building a fort there to secure the island for King George III. But again, misfortune struck when a British ship wrecked off the coast and 55 men were killed. But some of the men stayed even after the garrison abandoned Tristan da Cunha, all under the leadership of a man named Corporal William Glass. They worked to build a community, with the population rising and falling over the next 30 years, as some members left and new settlers came from the local island of St. Helena, as well as visiting whaling ships. But residents were still isolated, and when Glass died, 70 residents fled Tristan da Cunha, leaving only 28 people on the island. With civil wars, the opening of the Suez Canal and steamships replacing sails, Tristan da Cunha became more isolated than ever before, as ships avoided the perilous seas around her shores. For the families who stuck it out, their hard work paid off. They used one of their resources, crawfish, to build a successful canning factory on the Big Island. Scientific expeditions to study the rare bird species, and the construction of a permanent weather station all helped Tristan da Cunha thrive. But fate would intervene again in 1961, when the island began to erupt. Magma pushed up from the ocean floor, causing an earthquake and landslides, with a massive fissure opening up in the ground near the canning factory. The island was evacuated, with many of the residents returning to their homes in England. But a couple of years later, when it was safe to return, over 200 former residents made the trip back to Tristan da Cunha. Today, the population consists of a group who oversees the weather station on the northwest coast. With churches, schools, a museum, and hospital, about 300 residents have managed to keep the legacy of its original settlers alive, against all the odds. 1. Pitcairn Island. With tales of mutineers, burning ships, and an isolated outpost, Pitcairn Island has become infamous for its shameful past. But long before the crew of the Bounty used the island as a hideout, mythical tales have surrounded the outcrop in the Pacific Ocean. As an outcrop in the South Pacific, Pitcairn Island has a dark past. It became well known for a group of mutineers who overtook a British vessel known as the HMAV Bounty, who later dropped their anchor and drifted ashore to hide from authorities before settling there. Pitcairn Island, located 1,350 miles, 2,170 kilometers southeast of Tahiti, stretches just 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers wide, and 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers long. It's a volcanic island with no coral reefs to protect its shores, making it a treacherous landing place. It was originally discovered in 1767 by a commander of a British ship. The Royal Navy vessel HMS Bounty was sailing in the South Pacific from Tahiti to the West Indies when the crewman led by their acting lieutenant mutinied. After seizing control of the ship from the captain, Lieutenant William Bligh, the crew set Bligh and 18 loyalists adrift. The men who overtook the Bounty set sail towards Tahiti for a 7-month trek before landing on Pitcairn Island. As they settled into their new home, the mutineers found strange prehistoric stone tools and fishing hooks that were carved from bones. They started to wonder who had lived on the remote island long before they arrived. Stone building foundations, earth ovens, and quarries were also found in the dense undergrowth, and the abundance of coconut palms, which are not native to the island, pointed to previous residents farming them. On another nearby island, tools over 1,000 years old were found that were carved from stone. Fascinating petroglyphs carved into the rock cliffs depict Polynesian legends and myths that give a hint or two who lived there long before the mutiny occurred. Over the years, the island's population has gone on a bit of a roller coaster ride, at one time as high as 233 and later as low as 50. Its location from the closest continent adds to the air of mystery surrounding the island, allowing the legend of ancient people and the mutiny that brought newcomers there to survive. Thanks for watching. Which one of these forbidden islands fascinated you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye.